Thank you so much, Pastor Craig. So as I mentioned, I've taught this a couple times, but I normally spend a couple hours doing it, so I'm going to do the condensed version. And there's my email up there, and you guys are welcome to email me afterwards if you guys have any questions. But I'm going to try to go through some of this pretty quickly. Let's see. Okay, so I'll talk about what the job market looks like today. It's a little crazy, and talk about what the typical recruiting process looks like. Talk about how you can do assessments to figure out what is it that you really should be doing. Then go into kind of my main focus is really about resumes, and then if we have time, I'm going to touch on how do you have a proper online presence, and then effective networking as well. You can go up. Before we do that, actually, just a little introduction about myself. So about 6-7 years ago, I was actually asked at one of these Fortune 100 companies that I work for, I was asked to lead a centralized recruiting program because they said, we need more people and we're not doing it fast enough, we're not doing it efficiently enough. Everything is kind of siloed, one person, one hiring manager looking for one person, and we just need an army of people, right? And so I was leading that effort, and we were hiring about 200 people per year, and I did that for a couple of years. So got a chance to look at, in that time, literally thousands of resumes. So kind of I learned a lot about, how do you get noticed, right? When you're competing against sometimes hundreds or even thousands of applicants. At the same time, I've been on the other side of the table multiple times. So in the last 16 years, I've had to look for a job myself 3 different times. And I'm fortunate to say, and I give it all to God, that each time I've looked for a job, I've actually received multiple offers. So it's been great. And in fact, Pastor Craig mentioned that I attended University of Michigan. I actually went back to school in 2008, and that year was the first year that I was going to finally make 6 figures, and I left my job so I could go back to school full time. And if anybody remembers 2008, that was the year we had the Great Recession, and like 2 weeks after I started school, it was a Sunday night, I can remember it, Lehman Brothers declared bankruptcy, and the next morning, Monday morning, I'm in class, and I'm looking at my phone, and I'm like, okay, the market opened, and it only opened down 200 points, that's not too bad. And then a half hour later, it's like, oh, it's 400 points down. And by the time I finished my first class, it was down like 600 points. So 2 weeks after that, I'm already like, I'm like regretting coming back to school because I'm like, there's not going to be an economy for me to come back to. Just like Pastor Barnett said in there, God just surprised me, because 2009, when I was looking for a job, turned out to be like the hardest year to find a job, so they say, since the Great Depression. And I was at my wit's end because no one was returning my calls. But long story short, I ended up getting, again, multiple offers and got to be in a really great position. And so I'm very grateful for that. Fast forward several years ago, I was working for this one Fortune 100 company, and they had new management. They decided we'd grown too fast, and they decided to lay off 12,000 people, including all 30 people in my group. And so I had to look for a new job. I was fortunate enough to get offers from both Microsoft and Amazon, both great companies. And at my age, it's not about who's offering more money. It's what role do you want to be doing? What is going to get you excited to get up in front of them, right? So that's what kind of drove my decision. If you can move forward. So again, I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, and I'll try to leave some time at at the end for questions, and Ryan, if you can kind of maybe if we can finish like 10 minutes early, just kind of give me a little bit. You guys know that right now the market is pretty crazy. I was reading earlier this week that right now the Federal Reserve Board, Jerome Powell, he said there's currently 1.7 job openings for every unemployed person in America. And so you're thinking like, wow, there's so many opportunities out there. But if any of you have looked for a job in the past year, you're kind of wondering like, if this is true, why is no one returning my calls, right? Why I like sent out dozens of resumes and why is no one responding, right? In fact, it's gotten so hard for companies to find people that they've actually shifted to retention strategies. It's like we have to now spend a lot of effort not just trying to recruit people, but how do we keep the people that we already have, because they're leaving in droves, right? And so they've come up with like, hey, here's some great career development opportunities for you, and they're not even asking you to consider like doing stuff. They're actually like, hey, next Wednesday, everyone's going to go in this career development training. We want you to live your best career here, right? If you're not happy in your current job, we've got 300 other positions, 300 other different types of roles that you can consider that may be a better fit for you, right? And so while there are all these openings, they really, a lot of companies are focused on how do we fill these internally, right? So you're not just competing against other candidates externally, but you're even competing against people within the same company. And they're trying to provide, improved work-life balance to keep people in their current, if not current jobs, at least the current company. In fact, one of the things that a lot of companies are now offering is the ability to work remotely. But that's actually made it more difficult for people that are looking for a job, because before a company might have only looked in a certain region, like if they're based in Seattle, for example, they had a 25-mile, maybe 50-mile radius of where they were looking for people. But now that they're something like over 40% of jobs now you can do remote. Now they've opened it up to the entire country. So now instead of maybe getting 50 or 100 applicants, they might get 500 or 1,000, right? So it's actually making not just you as an individual, your job harder to find a new opportunity, but it also makes it even harder for the company to find the right people, because now they're like, oh, now we have to look through 1,000 resumes for each position potentially. The other thing is that applying for jobs, at least for Fortune 500 companies, that's pretty much all moved online. So, the days of mailing your resume in or going to, these job conferences, those things still do happen, but they're less and less frequent. And I participated in some of those job fairs, and I tell people like, hey, you've got a great resume, now I need you to go here and submit this online. Because we have an applicant tracking system that is going to track you through the whole process, through first round interviews, second round interviews, through offers, through onboarding, all of that. So it's all tracked in that, right? And because we get, companies get such an influx of resumes, that's how they have to, that's how they deal with it, is online tools. And they are getting smarter. A lot of artificial intelligence now goes into trying to find the right candidates, but it's a mountain of resumes, and these tools are still pretty blunt. And so trying to get noticed is still something that you need to very actively do. The one thing that I do want to mention is that finding a new job, whether it's looking within your current company or looking somewhere else, it's a numbers game. And so you have to knock on a lot of doors. I know when I was looking for a job, after grad school, I think I applied to 60 companies. I did get calls back from about 15 of them, and did first round interviews. I got invited to 4 final round interviews, and then I got 2 job offers. And so getting those 2 job offers, especially in a challenging market like it was in 2009, was great. But if you consider that I applied to 60 different companies, that's like a 3% hit rate, right? And so just remember that it can, you may need to knock on a lot of doors, and that looking for a new job is kind of a part-time job. Even if you're, and especially if you're looking for a job in your current company, I would argue that it'll take you longer to find a job. Why? Because not that you're complacent, but that you know, you're busy doing your 40 or even 50-hour job, right? And it really does take 10 or 20 hours. Plus, because you are currently working, you can be choosier about what it is you want to do next. So this is the recruiting process workflow, and this is just kind of very high level, but it's about, you know, from the time that a job is posted to when someone actually onboards, is sitting their butt in a seat, it's usually anywhere from like 60 to 120 days. In fact, I had done a project 9-10 years ago to understand why was it taking our company so long to fill critical roles. The average time was 106 days. And so they're like, we need to get that down to 40 days, right? And so I went through and made a number of just different suggestions of like, how do we do that? And it's pretty crazy, but Brian, if you could just kind of click on the next one. So the average posting that Fortune 500 gets for every opening is 250 applicants. And by the way, this information is about 9 months old, so the number may have changed, but I would argue it's probably gone up. Resume filtering. So resumes are filtered and ranked using just a handful of keywords. And that's it. That's the thing a lot of people don't understand, that you may have a 500-word resume. They're only keyed in on 4 or 5, maybe 6 words at the most. I didn't believe it when I first heard that, but having seen it in action now, I know that's true, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit. So again, companies get about roughly 250 resumes per job opening, but those get filtered through the HR recruiting system, and the hiring manager, they only get about 2 or 3 dozen resumes typically. They don't get all the hundreds of them, right? And so you want to bubble up to that, like 10% of resumes that they get. And then of those 2 or 3 dozen, the manager usually only has time to phone screen about 8 or 10 people. They usually set up like a half-hour phone screen and tell me about, you know, what interests you about this job, and you know, it's a very informal interview, but it is an interview, so you want to prepare for it like it is an interview, right? And then for the interview process, they usually are just selecting 4, 5, or 6 people. Usually they would have to spend time like in logistics, like if you were out of the region, they'd have to travel for you and stuff like that. Nowadays, you know, you can do a lot of it virtually, right, through Zoom or some other tools, so it's a little bit easier there, but again, it's still only, you know, 5 or 6 candidates that get selected. And then usually once they're done with interviews, they know pretty quickly, like almost the minute the last candidate is interviewed, they're like, okay, we know who we want to offer to. And so that usually happens pretty quickly. And then sometimes you might have, you know, take a couple weeks for the offer and to be made, and for counter offers maybe, and I hope you all do counter offer. And then if you're already in a position, then you have to give a couple weeks notice. Sometimes they, even if you're not working, they still need a couple weeks for you because they have to run background checks typically, and those usually take minimum 1 week, usually 2 weeks. And so the front end, the job posting and the resume filtering, that's 2 to 4 weeks time. The back end part, the offer and the onboarding, that's 2 to 4 weeks. Where things really get quagmired is in the middle. That's the manager's responsibility. And keep in mind that the reason they're hiring is because these managers are so busy. It's like, I need someone else. But I'm so busy, I can't like spend time to look for a person. I mean, it's kind of crazy to think about it that way. But if you're wondering, like, why was this job posted 3 months ago and they're still looking, that's why, because the manager is like just inundated with things to do and they need more help. And it's kind of funny, if they hire someone more quickly, they'd have more time to do some of these things. Next slide if you don't mind. So assessing yourself. So kind of big picture, what you enjoy doing, which is your passions, and what you're good at doing, which is your talents. Those, you have to remember, those are two different things. And sometimes there might be something that you're passionate about, but you're not very good at, right? Or there's some things that you're really good at that you actually don't like doing, right? So think of this matrix, the areas where you have a high passion for and you have a high skill for, those are the areas that you want to focus, but you also want to consider these other areas, especially in the areas where, on the bottom right corner, where you have a high passion for it, but you may not have the skills there. If you've got a high passion, a high drive for something, you can learn that stuff, right? But the opposite, if you're really skilled at something, but you have a low passion for it, you should really kind of avoid those areas, because you're not really going to enjoy that much, right? Next slide. So what I recommend is looking at different resources to do career assessments, because just kind of you thinking about what is it that I want, what is it, it's like Pastor Barnett was talking in there, we don't always know what it is that we really want, and so it really is, God, why don't you surprise me, But I would say that some of these tools will surprise you as well in terms of finding out, like, hey, what are the things that I should be considering? And not only will it help you understand yourself better and what your focus areas should be, but you can actually use that feedback from those assessments and put them in your resume. It'll make your resume writing a lot easier. And it'll also help in interviews, because a lot of times people ask you, tell me about some of your strengths or tell me about some of your weaknesses, right? And you can use those things from the assessments. And there's a few that I mentioned here. One of them is what's called a Myers-Briggs type indicator. A lot of times it'll tell you, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, you're a thinker versus a feeler, right? And I really like this one here, 16personalities.com, because it'll actually say these are the career areas that you should consider that would be a good fit with and like me, I'm an introverted thinker. Another one, it's called Clifton Strengths. It used to be called the Strengths Finder. That's. I'm gonna go back. That's another one to consider. A career leader is pretty thorough as well, and there's a promo code there. That one's pretty expensive. It's $95, but there's a $20 discount if you guys want to consider that. And we're going to make this available for folks, Brian. Yeah, so we can email this to you. So I'm going to focus on the resume part right now. So I really need you guys to think of a resume not as a fact sheet, but as a marketing brochure. Because you're selling a product and that product is you. So yes, it has to be factual based, but don't, you want to make it a little bit more three-dimensional so that it stands out, so that you stand out. And what I like to tell people is that the goal of a resume is not to get a job. And that sounds a little counterintuitive, but you have to remember that this whole process is steps. The goal of the resume is to get an interview. So you have to fill that pipeline. You have to send your resume out to 30, 40, 50, 60, 100 companies because maybe only 5 or 10% are going to respond, and maybe only 5 or 10% are going to invite you to an interview, right? And so you want to get that resume down so that people are responding to it, right? So that you get invited to those interviews. Make sure that, let's go back up really quick to that. You want to make sure that it's legible and easy to scan. Don't fill it too much, because recruiters, they say that, and I can attest to this, that they spend an average of 7 seconds looking at a resume because they've got hundreds or thousands to go through. And so they're scanning very quickly, and if you make it too busy, it makes it really difficult for them to find the sweet spots in your resume. I tell people use the CAR format, that's context, action, result, and I'll go more into that in a moment. Focus on a few relevant highlights per job. If you've got a job where you spent, 5, 6, 7 years, 10 years at, there's a lot of stuff you've done in that time, but don't put 10 or 12 bullets. Find like the 3 or 4 of those bullets that were the most impactful and that are the most relevant to the job that you're seeking, and put those in there. Really focus on the highlights of your career, not on everything that you did. Identify keywords under job requirements. So this is important. When you see a job posting, they're going to say, hey, come work for us, we're a great company, and this is what we want you to do, and then there will be a list of job requirements. Sometimes there will be just 4 or 5 job requirements. Sometimes some managers go crazy and they put 10, 15, 20. But just like if you're making a list of what you would like to see in other people, you don't put the most important stuff at the bottom of the list. They're right at the very top. So focus on the top 3 or 4 bullets. That's where you're going to find the keywords. You want to make sure as much as possible that you're including whatever keywords are in those 3 or 4 top bullets in your resume. Make sure those words are somewhere in your resume. That's the most critical part. Make it more 3-dimensional. I always include an additional part to the bottom of my resume and just put 2 or 3 little factoids about yourself. Something like a fun fact. I've run a marathon in 7 different continents, or I love cooking French cuisine, or whatever it is. I coach my son's Little League, and have 2 or 3 of those, because that's going to help people connect with you. And it's like, yeah, this person, I think I would like to work with this person, right? Yeah. I create a unique resume for each role. If you're looking for 3 or 4 different roles, create a baseline resume, but then tweak it for each role that you're applying for. And then, I haven't done this, but some people swear by it, getting a professional resume service. If you really need help with building a resume, some of these could cost hundreds of dollars, but everyone I've spoken to has sworn like, yeah, I got immediate responses after they redid my resume. Next slide. So, I think I'm gonna give this out, and it kind of walks through a resume, but it basically talks about some of the stuff that I'm talking about here, and you can kind of go through these quickly, Ron. So I'll hand this out here. The next slide there. And again, this is talking about some of the stuff that I mentioned here. Next slide. If you don't have a degree, there's a lot of stuff online where you can get certificates. And by the way, again, I'm with Microsoft, and we own LinkedIn, which purchased a company called Lynda.com, which is now called LinkedIn Learning. But I actually got this before I joined Microsoft. But you can, this course took me a couple hours, and I can put this on my LinkedIn profile to say, I have a certificate in business analysis foundations or what have you. Next slide. Cover letter, that's important too, because a lot of times you're going through HR people and they prefer reading cover letters over resumes, because resumes are these boring actually. Next slide. Have a consistent online presence, so have a picture, a professional picture, not just on your LinkedIn profile, but if you're looking for a job, maybe also have that same picture on Twitter and Facebook and other things like that, because sometimes people do look at those things, right? There's a number of things there. I'm going to Effective networking, I cannot stress how important this is. As much as you need to polish your resume, going out there and meeting with people and letting your social and professional network know that you're looking for new opportunities is so critical. Multiple studies have shown that anywhere from 70 to 78% of people have their current job from someone they knew or someone that knew them, right? It's really critical. In fact, despite all my efforts, the two offers I got from Microsoft and Amazon came from actually me meeting people who knew someone that was hiring. So at the end of the day, that's what really worked for me. I'm going to stop there and open it up for questions because I know we don't have too much time. And apologies. Yes.
So, when it comes to my resume,
Thank you for stepping
a
up
large
on this.
portion of what I have done, especially while getting my degrees, is volunteer work. And I have had help writing my resume, but they all seem fake to me. How do I fix that?
I would say in anything you do, including volunteer work, there's always an opportunity for you to lead. So look at the things that, like, what did I do in that opportunity? I interviewed with a big company one time that ended up making me an offer, and I had put under my additional, like, I was with this nonprofit volunteering, and I won the President's Award, and that's it. It was like 8 words because I was trying to cram a lot of stuff. And they're like, what did you win that award for? And when I explained to them how I was given that award, they're like, why didn't you put that in your resume? And I'm like, well, I didn't have room. And they're like, get rid of some of this other crap. Sorry.
I got it.
Right. Yeah. What's up?
I have a question.
Yes.
So when you're on LinkedIn, I have a professional profile, and you ask people for connections, it almost feels like you're begging for a connection. How do you go about that?
I would say I'm very choosy with my friends on social media, like Facebook. But with LinkedIn, I'm the exact opposite. I pretty much accept everyone unless I think they're like in sales and they just want to connect with me to get access to my network, then that's the only time I kind of say no. But with LinkedIn, I have easily triple the number of connections as I do on Facebook. And so I would say, be open to reaching out to other people. And maybe you reach out to 100 people and maybe only 20 or 30 will accept, but that's still, you've just grown your network by 20 or 30 people, right? And you can do the same to accept other people as well. Yes?
I have 2 questions. So first one, how important are the LinkedIn recommendations? Are they reviewed by the recruiters and they consider?
LinkedIn is maybe important, and this is just my own experience. LinkedIn is important only once you're kind of whittled down to like the top 10. Then a lot of people will start doing their homework to see, I want to know more about this individual. Yeah. It is still important, but it's not always the first way to do it.
And then one more question is, how does the referral work? Like, does this follow a different pattern? If somebody refers a resume, if you know someone at the company, and then usually we can send the resume directly to them. Is that a different pattern?
I think if you're going to, I do recommend getting referrals and looking for people that work there, but I would also encourage them like, hey, don't just, if you can not just submit my resume through the referral system, but if you can also reach out to the manager and say, hey, I submitted this referral, but I just wanted to get this, at the top of your inbox to consider this candidate, right? And here's his resume for your convenience. I maybe have time for one more question. Yes.
Okay, resumes. 1 page or 2 pages?
2 max. 2 max. Yeah, you have to just, I'm an old guy, so I've had to like cut off like, you know, I just keep it to the last like
You have
10
to
or
have
12 years.
whole, like, job experiences, like from 2 decades ago, you worked in these companies.
Yeah, I just focus on the last 10 or 12 years, and honestly, people don't really care what you did when you were 18 or 19 or whatever, right? And so they really just care what have you done lately. You know? Yeah, okay. I'm available afterwards if people have questions, and again, there's my email and there's my LinkedIn profile if you want to, you know, connect with me that way as well. Thank you so much for your time.